The Young and the Restless spoilers. For a long time, Detective Borrow existed on the fringes of Genoa City's collective consciousness, a figure acknowledged but rarely examined. Present in the background of investigations, yet never fully allowed to step into the harsh light where truth becomes dangerous. He was spoken of as competent, methodical, even relentless, but the narrative never lingered on him long enough to define his impact. That absence, however, now feels deliberate in retrospect, because as the calendar turns to early 2026, the silence surrounding Borrow becomes the most unsettling signal of all. A leaked whisper circulating quietly through production corridors and fan speculation alike suggests that Borrow is about to uncover something so destabilizing that it will not merely rewrite the murder of Damon, but fracture the assumptions Genoa City has relied on for years. This revelation is not framed as a simple twist or a last-minute reversal, but as the slow surfacing of a truth that has been deliberately buried beneath misdirection, fear, and convenient scapegoats. And at the center of that burial lies the name everyone has been too eager to condemn: Matt. From the moment Damon was killed, the town's collective instinct was to simplify the horror by assigning guilt quickly, cleanly, and permanently. Matt became that answer not because the evidence was overwhelming, but because the narrative required a villain that fit comfortably within existing resentments. He was flawed, complicated, and emotionally volatile, which made him easy to frame in the court of public opinion. Yet the more Borrow traces the early hours of the investigation, the more glaring the inconsistencies become. Timelines that were accepted without scrutiny begin to unravel under closer inspection. Witness statements that once seemed firm now feel rehearsed, shaped less by memory than by pressure. Borrow does not rush to contradict the prevailing belief because he understands something fundamental about Genoa City. Truth here does not emerge through confrontation, but through patience. What he discovers instead is far more disturbing than a single wrongful accusation. There is another criminal moving silently beneath the surface, someone who understood how to let Matt absorb the suspicion while they disappeared into the margins, protected by chaos and assumption. As this realization takes form, the pressure radiates outward, pulling Mariah and Holden into a storm they never expected to face. Both insist, publicly and privately, that the situation is far more complex than it appears, that they have been dragged into a narrative that refuses to recognize nuance. Their denials are not rehearsed deflections but expressions of genuine frustration, especially for Mariah, whose anger burns hottest at the implication that she could be capable of such violence. Yet Borrow is not swayed by emotional protest alone. His investigation has moved beyond hearsay and into a far more dangerous territory: evidence. Not the kind that can be easily explained away, but fragments that point to presence, movement, and intention during the critical window surrounding Damon's death. This evidence does not immediately exonerate Matt, but it does something far more unsettling. It proves that the crime scene was never as isolated as everyone believed, and that someone else was there, unseen and unchallenged, manipulating the shadows. The implications of this discovery ripple outward, intersecting with a visual clue that has already sent shockwaves through the fandom. A video showing Cohen aboard a private jet alongside Britton James and Melissa Ordway. On the surface, the image appears harmless, even celebratory, but within the context of the unfolding mystery, it becomes something else entirely. Private jets in Genoa City are never merely symbols of luxury. They are symbols of mobility, secrecy, and escape. Borrow understands this immediately. Movement without records, conversations without witnesses, and alliances forged beyond the reach of scrutiny are the true currencies of power here. The presence of these three figures together strongly suggests that the story is converging rather than fragmenting, that multiple narrative threads are being drawn into the same gravitational field. This is not coincidence, but coordination, and Borrow's role within this convergence is no longer peripheral. He is being positioned as the axis upon which the truth will finally turn. What makes the situation even more volatile is the confirmation that this mystery will not exist in isolation. The latest previews for 2026 make it clear that the arc will pull in Devin, Abby, Daniel Romelody Jr., Tessa Porter, and Mariah Copeland, weaving personal relationships into the investigative framework until the boundaries between professional duty and emotional survival dissolve completely. For Devin and Abby, this threat is particularly insidious because it strikes at the foundation of trust they have worked so hard to rebuild. The possibility that someone close to them may be connected, directly or indirectly, to Damien's death introduces a psychological tension that cannot be resolved through facts alone. It forces them to confront the terrifying question of whether loyalty itself has become a liability. Daniel's involvement adds another layer of instability because his presence often signals the collision of past mistakes with present consequences. His proximity to the investigation suggests that unresolved history is about to resurface, not as memory, but as motive. Meanwhile, Tessa and Mariah find themselves trapped between public suspicion and private fear, aware that even innocence offers no protection when perception has already hardened into judgment. Mariah's anger, once dismissed as defensiveness, begins to take on a sharper edge as she realizes that the real danger may not lie in clearing her name, but in surviving the truth once it is exposed. Through all of this, Detective Borrow remains deliberately restrained, his power derived not from dominance but from inevitability. He does not announce his findings or rush to dismantle the narrative that has held Genoa City together since Damien's death. Instead, he allows the tension to build, knowing that the truth, when revealed, will not simply shock, but destabilize relationships, rewrite loyalties, and force every involved party to confront their own role in sustaining a lie. The leaked information that initially suggested Borrow would uncover something terrifying now feels almost understated. Because what he is truly uncovering is not just the identity of a hidden criminal, but the collective willingness of a community to accept comfort over truth. As 2026 unfolds, it becomes clear that the Damien murder mystery is no longer about who pulled the trigger or delivered the fatal blow. It is about who benefited from silence, who redirected suspicion, and who understood that in Genoa City, the most effective crime is not the one that leaves blood behind, but the one that leaves doubt everywhere else. Detective Borrow's emergence as a central figure signals a tonal shift for the Young and the Restless, moving the story away from simple accusation toward a far darker examination of complicity and consequence. When the final revelation comes, it will not arrive as a single shocking name, but as a realization that the truth has been present all along, patiently waiting for someone willing to see it. And when that moment arrives, it will not merely clear Matt's name or expose a hidden criminal. It will force Abby, Devin, Mariah, Tessa, Daniel, and everyone connected to Damien's death to reckon with the cost of believing the wrong story for far too long. For a long time, Detective Borrow had felt like a foggy silhouette at the edge of Genoa City's story, acknowledged but not fully defined. A man whose presence in investigations was noted, but whose inner workings were left deliberately off-screen. If the first part of his tale was about the fog starting to thin, then what came next was the moment the ground under everyone's feet began to tremble, not from some loud explosion, but from hairline fractures spreading quietly beneath what everyone thought was solid concrete. While fans outside the story world dissected leaked images and cast confirmations, inside Genoa City, the equivalent of that private jet video was found in flight logs, encrypted security records, and passenger manifests that did not match what had been officially filed. Borrow did not care about celebrity speculation or fandom chatter. What mattered to him was the pattern. In a dimly lit room, with nothing but the glow of a monitor reflecting on his tired eyes, he followed a trail that began with one private jet and branched into a network of movements that no one had truly questioned. Flight numbers that didn't line up with weather patterns. Departure times that conveniently overlapped with key moments in the Damien investigation. Passengers who were on board on paper, but whose devices pinged cell towers in completely different cities. It was in those gaps between the official story and the verifiable data that Borrow began to see something sinister. While the narrative inside Genoa City had eagerly crucified Matt for Damien's death, Someone else had been using the sky itself as a curtain, scrubbing time and distance out of the crime. Devin and Abby had no idea their names had started to appear repeatedly in Borrow's notes, not as direct perpetrators, but as unavoidable nodes in a much larger network. Their lives had always existed at the intersection of business and love, of boardrooms and bedrooms, and it was precisely that combination that now made them so vulnerable. Every decision they made could suddenly be read in two ways, as an attempt to protect what they loved, or as a calculated effort to hide something. Abby felt the air grow heavier each time Dameron's name came up, even in casual conversation, as if the walls themselves tensed. Devin tried to soothe them both, insisting that the lingering tension was nothing more than the echo of an unsolved case, the natural residue of trauma. But deep down he understood that Borrow's silence did not mean failure. It meant the detective was waiting until he had enough to topple the entire scaffolding at once. That realization gnawed him. He started pulling up old reports, contracts, meeting minutes that Dameron had attended, trying to reassure himself that everything had been above board, that the lines of cause and effect were clean. Instead, the more he looked, the more the past refused to sit neatly in place. A stray comment Dameron had made about feeling watched, a sudden hesitation over signing a particular document, a cryptic email that had been deleted hours after so-called routine negotiations. Each detail that Devin had dismissed as coincidence now took on a new weight. Mariah, meanwhile, felt as though she had been shoved into a windowless room with no air. Her anger at being suspected of murder was not just about the horror of the accusation. It was about the way her history had become a weapon against her once again. She could feel people around her silently recalculating, revisiting every misstep of her past and using it as justification for their doubt. The old scars of being treated as an outsider, of needing to work twice as hard to prove she was not a threat, split open as if they had never fully healed. Even those who claimed to believe in her sometimes hesitated just long enough to hurt. She wanted to insist that she had nothing to do with Dameron's death, that the narrative being drafted around her was grotesquely wrong. But every time she caught the flicker of doubt in someone's eyes, she understood that the truth alone might not be enough to free her. Tessa felt the collapse building, too. The fear that settled in her chest went beyond the prospect of losing Mariah to a legal nightmare or media-feeding frenzy. It was also the terror that Borrow, if he widened his scope, might start seeing patterns in their lives that weren't there or might pull them into a web so tangled they could not escape unscarred. Their rare quiet moments, once a refuge, were now haunted by the sense of a ticking clock, as if peace itself had become a countdown. Holden watched from a slightly different vantage point, no less affected but more analytical. He understood that anyone who stepped into the path of this reopened investigation needed to accept a hard truth. The resolution of Dameron's murder would not simply redeem one person and condemn another. It would stain many hands, often in ways they had never considered. He believed in Mariah's innocence in a way that did not need words. People who shared the same kind of darkness in their past recognized its absence in each other. He knew she had not killed Dameron, but that did not mean everything orbiting her was untouched. Holden began tracking the peripheral connections, the people who were never at the center of any event but consistently appeared on the margins, at parties where Dameron had been present, in email chains that technically had nothing to do with him, as silent partners in business deals his name had briefly crossed. From that angle, a new shape emerged. He could sense that Borrow was moving toward a truth that would be difficult for anyone to digest, especially those whose security was built on assumptions. The real killer might not be the person Genoa City loved to hate, but someone positioned exactly where no one had bothered to look, a figure trusted, overlooked, or dismissed as harmless. Daniel Melody Jr. found himself dragged into the story as someone who never intended to re-enter the main narrative, but suddenly discovered the stage door locked behind him once he stepped out to check the hallway. Daniel's life had always been haunted by the way his past mistakes resurfaced at the worst possible moments, but this was different. The guilt worming through him came not from something he had done, but from something he had seen and then chosen to bury. In the days leading up to Damien's death, or perhaps on the night itself, the timestamps blurred together in his memory. Neil had noticed something off. A conversation abruptly cut short when he entered a room, a hurried exchange of documents, a look of almost desperate caution in Damien's eyes that Daniel had dismissed as work stress or paranoia. At the time, he had decided not to get involved. He told himself he was doing the mature thing, avoiding drama, giving people their privacy. Now, as Borrow went back over everything, Daniel began to suspect that the fragment he had ignored might have been the missing piece of the puzzle everyone else was trying to force into the wrong space. He stood at a crossroads. Either he confessed what he had seen and risked drawing the storm directly over himself and the people he loved, or he remained silent and watched the wrong narrative harden into fact. In Genoa City, secrets never affected only one person. They pulled entire constellations of lives out of orbit. What no one outside Borrow knew was that he had already started sketching a pattern of how Damien had been funneled into a trap. Piecing together security records, keycard logs, phone metadata, and financial crumbs, he discovered lines of interaction between accounts that were supposed to be disconnected. A consulting fee paid to someone who never appeared on any project summary. A charity grant awarded to a group whose public presence did not match its bank activity. Shell companies passing the same funds in a loop that ended in a dead zone of offshore obfuscation. It all pointed to something structured rather than chaotic, controlled rather than impulsive. Damien, Borrow suspected, had brushed against these currents made by auditing numbers that were not supposed to be audited, maybe by asking the wrong question at the wrong time. Somewhere along the line, it had been decided that the simplest way to keep the system intact was to remove Damien entirely. When Borrow placed that financial map alongside the flight data from the private jet registered under an innocuous-sounding holding company, the picture sharpened. He was no longer looking for a single person who panicked and lashed out. He was tracking an apparatus, a small but ruthless network of people who had learned to use violence as a maintenance tool. Devon began to feel the pressure intensify as Borrow's questions subtly changed flavor. The detective no longer asked broad, polite inquiries about how everyone had been coping after Damien's death. Instead, he asked Devon to walk him through specific meetings, to recall whether Damien had seemed uneasy before certain negotiations, to clarify why certain internal reviews had been delayed. At first, Devon stuck to the script he had given himself. It had all been standard corporate tension, the kind that came with high stakes and big egos. But memory is stubborn. The more Borrow asked, the more unwanted details bubbled up. There was that time Damien lingered in Devon's office doorway as though he wanted to say something but backed off at the last minute. There was the deleted message Damien sent after hours hinting that he had uncovered an inconsistency that he wanted to run by Devon privately. At the time, Devon had been too exhausted to follow up. He told himself he would deal with it in the morning. Morning never came for Damien. Now, sitting across from Borrow, Devon realized that his confident dismissal of those concerns back then had not just been a minor oversight. It might have been the opening through which the real perpetrators maneuvered. The guilt did not immediately make him guilty of anything in the legal sense, but it tore into him in a way no accusation could. Borrow did not have to say it aloud. The implication was there in the silence between questions. If someone had listened to Damien sooner, would he still be alive? Abby existed at the fault line between loyalty and fear. She had always walked a tightrope between the image she wanted to project resilient, in control, and the reality of living in families and businesses where secrets were treated like currency. Watching Devon unravel under the increasing weight of his memories shook her deeply. She began to run back through her own interactions with Damien, not as a host at society or a supportive ally, but as a potential witness who had missed something crucial. There had been that one night when Damien met a guest who insisted on anonymity, sitting at a corner table where the light fell just short of their face. Abby remembered the way Damien had tried to act casual, the slightly forced laughter, the way the envelope had exchanged hands under the table with a clumsy attempt at discretion. At the time, she had chosen to rationalize it as business-related confidentiality, the kind of thing that happened all the time in a town like Genoa City. Now those memories refused to stay benign. Every detail that once seemed mundane started to glow red-hot in her mind, as if marked retroactively as evidence. Abby wondered whether, in her determination to protect the image of stability for her family and her business, she had painted cuter explanations over cracks that should have been examined instead of concealed. While they wrestled with their personal reckonings, Borrow stuck to his strategy of quiet persistence. He did not storm into rooms with accusations. He did not brandish evidence like a weapon to force confessions. He collected. He watched. He let people talk long enough to reveal themselves. Averted eyes at the mention of flight records. A too careful answer when he asked who had approved a particular consultant contract. A sudden shift in posture when the word Damien appeared in a question that had initially sounded routine. At night, he spread his notes across his desk, lines connecting names to dates to locations like the strands of a spider's web. At the center of that web was not Matt, despite what the town had decided. At the center was a void, a space shaped like a person, who had never once been listed as a suspect, shielded by their reputation, their relationships, or their apparent insignificance. Borrow knew from experience that the most dangerous person in any room was often the one no one had taken seriously enough to question. The emotional tension in the city rose another notch when Borrow finally requested a private meeting with Mariah as someone he was preparing to arrest. But as a central link in Damien's social and professional circles, the way he framed his questions made it clear that he was no longer interested in whether she had physically been at the crime scene. He wanted to know who had access to her, who confided in her, who had been close enough to read her reactions and adjust their behavior accordingly. Instead of interrogating her about alibis, he asked about vibes, about shifts in tone, about moments when Damien seemed more guarded, about anyone who seemed to invested in controlling the narrative after his death. In doing so, he forced Mariah into a confrontation with herself. Her fury at being suspected had protected her from a different kind of terror, the possibility that she had seen signs of a deeper rot and chosen to dismiss them because it was easier, or because acknowledging them would have meant admitting that someone she trusted might be monstrous. The more Borrow gently but relentlessly circled her memories, the more Mariah realized the real question was not whether she was innocent, but whether she truly wanted every hidden thing dragged into the light, no matter who it destroyed. Over the following days, Borrow tightened the circle, not by cornering anyone physically, but by shrinking the room of plausible deniability around them. Devin came to see that his early decision to downplay strange financial anomalies and Damien's concerns had given cover to people who were counting on his desire for stability. Abby had to look at the gap between what she knew and what she had chosen not to ask about, and accept that keeping things smooth might have meant helping someone else keep things deadly. Daniel felt the walls of his own secrecy closing in, realizing that his one withheld observation could either be the key that finally snapped the mystery into coherence or the stone that shattered multiple lives at once. Mariah and Tessa had to accept that, whether or not they wanted any role in Damien's story. Their names had been etched into its walls from the moment they became entangled with people who had more secrets than they admitted. As the picture formed, still incomplete but undeniably coherent, Borrow recognized that he was on the brink of a decision that would alter more than just the status of a cold case. He was no longer investigating a single act of violence. He was up against a structuria culture that had normalized the use of silence, misdirection, and selective memory as survival tools. Exposing the killer would require tearing through layers of complicity, confronting not only the person who had delivered the final blow, but also the people who had set the stage, who had looked away, who had benefited. That was what made the early 2026 leak feel less like a spoiler and more like a prophecy, the promise that Borrow was about to reveal something terrifying. In the end, the terror would not come only from the identity of the person who had killed Damien, but from the mirror his revelation would hold up to Genoa City itself. The thin line separating victim, witness, and accomplice would blur until almost no one could say with certainty which side they truly stood on. Standing at the threshold of that revelation, Borrow understood that once he named the figure hiding in the blank space at the center of his web, there would be no going back. His next move would not just test whether Matt could be cleared or whether a hidden criminal could be dragged into the open. It would test whether Genoa City had the courage to admit that its greatest danger had never been the unstable outsider everyone pointed at, but the person or people woven so deeply into its fabric that no one thought to suspect them at all.